Hello, and thank you for joining me for Grant Calendar versus Grant Strategy. I'm Diane Leonard, and I'll be walking you through this material today. I want to share just a little bit about me before we get into the session. I'm a GPC, which means I'm a Grant Professional Certified. That's through the Grant Professional Certification Institute, an affiliate organization of the Grant Professionals Association. I'm also one of about 40 approved trainers for the Grant Professionals Association and a registered Scrum trainer through Scrum Inc. Now, unfortunately, none of those things guarantee that we get every grant that we write, but what they do indicate is my passion for the best practices and competencies in our field, and especially how we think about the way in which we manage projects, the way we facilitate teams, and make our work visible. And that's really what the point of today's session is. How do we have buy-in from our team when it comes to grant calendars and grant strategy? How can we make all of that work visible for our colleagues? So in this session today, we're going to begin by talking about grant calendars. We will then move into conversations about grant strategy, how to create and follow the strategies. And lastly, we'll be talking about how our grant team can help us, can really make the entire grant seeking strategy stronger, more sustainable, and more competitive. That's really what it's all about. So as we dig in, we'll start by talking about the grant calendar. A grant calendar, loosely defined as a calendar that has the deadlines for the grants you intend to apply for in the upcoming year, or the upcoming 6 months, or the upcoming 18 months. But it needs to be more than that in order to serve more than the grant writer, more than the grant professional. When we think about a grant calendar and what it needs to be as highly effective as possible for the organization, it needs to be a way that the team, the stakeholders in an organization can see what is our implementation plan, what are our priorities for which grants we will focus on, which pre-planning activities, which relationship building activities, which reports, all the things that it will take in order for the grant seeking strategy to be successful. So as we look at this visible calendar that's on the screen right now, it's pretty messy. Yep, indeed it is. Because this is a way, by putting it on a wall with stickies, it was a way that a team could come together and walk through the prioritized plan together. And you're right, we've got different colors, we have different sizes. Exactly. That's going to help us think about the different types of work. And so when we look at this visual, as messy as it may seem, well, what it did was bring a team together to create shared understanding before we dig in and start moving towards each individual deadline, each individual draft. One of the things that's really helpful when we walk through this exercise of creating and maintaining a grant calendar is to recognize that not all grants are the same. I know you probably already knew that. Not all grants require the same amount of effort. Some are relatively small applications that may take, yes, some coordinated effort and thought on your part and that of your team, but may be a 2-page letter without any attachments. Other times, it might be a 10-page narrative with multiple attachments. Yet still, it may be a very complicated government grant with multiple character counted responses, budget information, and countless attachments. Well, that's what's actually represented on the screen for you here now. This one is a specific grant opportunity that was through the New York State Consolidated Funding Application process. And the reason I like to show this one as an example is because as you look at the image on the right-hand side of your screen, we see that there are 3 different color Post-its. When we look at our grant calendar, what will we see? 1 deadline. But these are the subcomponents, the key activities that need to happen and be completed in order for that one singular deadline to be met. So when we encounter a very large application within our grant calendar, within our implementation plan, when we're thinking about how to visualize that and lay it out with our group, we may, not required, but we may find it helpful to break down the subcomponents before we represent that deadline with air quotes, just one Post-it on our plan. And so what's here, we've got the dark blue, those represent the different iterations of the narrative responses. We see the orange, which represents the different iterations of both the budget and the budget narrative or justification. And then each individual yellow sticky note represents one very hefty required attachment. Things like an architect study, things like 3 sets of quotes for the entire project, things like community support letters. These aren't simply a 501c3 upload. These are attachments that take effort by the team before they can be completed and submitted. So as I mentioned, this may be something that would be helpful to you. And as we walk through the grant calendar exercise, I'd like you to remember that this may be helpful when you look at some of the very large applications that are going to be part of your calendar. So the first image you saw was a very rough but in-person visual representation of a grant calendar. And then that second image, same thing, in person, sticky notes on the wall, on a butcher block piece of paper that was stuck to a conference wall. That's a great, quick way as a team to put together the details of a grant calendar to see what the plan might look like. But let's be honest, not all our teams are together, whether we're dealing with a time of hybrid and remote work or not. Our teams are made up in very different ways. And so I want to walk you through the process and acknowledge that you can do this in person. You could do this in a hybrid fashion utilizing technology or completely remote using some different tools. And so before I even walk you through the steps, there are a few tools that I find to be really helpful for facilitating this event, because what you're trying to do is represent basically a big whiteboard like you'd stand in front of in a conference room. And so one that may be helpful is called Mural, mural.com. Mural is great because they can give free licenses to nonprofit organizations. It's a limitless virtual whiteboard. A similar tool is Miro, MIRO.com. While they don't offer free licenses for nonprofits, any team can have 3 virtual limitless whiteboards at no cost. And so you can do your entire grant calendar exercise in just one of those 3 boards. There is also a whiteboard app through Post-it. And so that can offer you the opportunity to have, again, a shared visual space where you can work as a team. If you're in person, grab those sticky notes, grab some different markers, and get ready to lay it out on a wall, or maybe butcher block paper taped down on a conference table, and then you could put it up on the wall when you're done. So a lot of different options for where and how you facilitate this. But your prep work before you actually start step 1 is to lay out 12 months. So pick a color, virtual or hard copy, and lay out 12 months, whether you want to focus on a fiscal year that is July through June, whether you're focused on a calendar year, and so we're going to do January to December. Maybe you're talking about a fiscal year that's October to September. Doesn't matter. You want 12 months at the top of what's about to be your visual grant calendar. Okay, good. Now you're ready. You've got either your physical space prepped or your virtual board ready for your team, and you have the 12 months that you're going to focus on for your grant calendar laid out. So here's the first step. Take a second color sticky. It should be something that's different than the months that you've just laid out. What I'd like for you to note on those stickies are the dates of the absolutes, the things that you know are coming up. It could be, as represented on the screen, renewals with current funders that you have. It could be that you know that a particular corporate foundation opens up their process and has a due date of May 1st every year. Or it could be that you know that there is a government renewal process that starts and ends in July of every year. There's going to be a lot of different details, but these are the ones that you know you should plan for. As I mentioned, when you think about these opportunities, if one of them is a really large application, if you want to break that down into the known subcomponents so that you can see more of the work, have a better visual representation, you are certainly welcome to do so at this point. Now, my image is only showing you 3 months. Please do step 1 for all 12 months. All right, and once you have that done, you're ready to move on to step 2. We're going to grab another color sticky note. And on this color sticky note, I would like for you to lay out what are the report deadlines that you have for your current grant makers. Do you have a financial report that's due monthly? Do you have a quarterly report that's due? Maybe it's only an interim and final report. Those should all be placed on the grant calendar. They are absolutely critical for maintaining those grant maker relationships and potentially setting you up to receive funding again in the future. And again, we do this for all 12 months that we've established are part of our grant calendar. We then move on to step 3. Now I'd like you to think about the deadlines that actually you have a lot of flexibility and say in when those grants are going to be submitted. So we reference these as rolling deadlines so that the funder might say applications accepted on an ongoing basis. Applications accepted year-round with board meetings quarterly to review and make decisions. These are the opportunities where you can say, where do I have capacity to get that work done? And so as you're placing these on your calendar, it's not quite as simple as the first 2 steps. Rather, you should step back, look at your 12 months and see where do I have fewer sticky notes under a month. So in this 1 quarter that you can see on the screen, what we see is that there appears to be fewer Post-its in the month of June, and all right, there's also a space in July. So by putting 3 rolling deadlines on the calendar in that additional sticky note color, what we find is that we now have an equal number of Post-its in each of the 3 months. Does that mean that each of those takes exactly the same amount of work? Not necessarily, absolutely not. But we're doing just some rough, large-scale planning here to try and come up with a plan that we think is sustainable, that we think we can successfully implement in order to achieve the grant revenue target. So once we have our rolling deadlines placed on the calendar, it's time to pause and step back and look at the entire 12 months. If our organization has done grant application and grant seeking work before, we want to stop and think about how this new plan compares to what we have achieved in the past. This could be as simple as counting how many foundation, how many county, how many state, how many federal applications may be represented on the calendar. Maybe we even count how many reports and counting against how many we completed in a previous 12-month period. What we're looking for is either a significant increase or decrease that might indicate that either we are pushing a little too hard, we've got a little too much optimism for how much we could achieve without maybe having a structural or a staff change, or, actually we might have some more room to plan for some more applications. There is no right or wrong answer when you do your count. It's about comparing to your team's previous work, not about comparing to another organization, because you don't know all the details of how many staff support their grant seeking efforts, of how many hours their grant professional may get to spend each week on grant efforts versus other fundraising. There is a lot we don't know. So we don't want to compare our count to another organization, and trust me, there is no perfect industry standard that you should be following. So we stop to review this visual calendar as a team and to say, yes, we think that this aligns with what we've accomplished in the past. Maybe we've added one or two more. Maybe we've said, you know what, we're going to add a federal and take a few foundation off. It's for team discussion here to say, is this appropriate? Does it feel well balanced over the course of the year and hopefully, therefore, sustainable? What happens now is that when our team has something come up, we're implementing this grant calendar, which means we're writing applications, we're sharing drafts, we're getting reports out the door. But when something unexpected happens, let's say, for example, a state grant opens that we weren't planning for, but the team agrees that it seems like a really good opportunity. Well, now we can look at our grant calendar and see if we've got the capacity as a team to do that work, or if there's anything in our planned work that might be flexible. So what we see in our example here for May, June, and July, if that state grant opened and we see that it's due at the end of July, what might be the first thing that we would shift as a team in order to create the space for this unexpected deadline? Yeah, you're right. We'd probably take away one, two, or three of those rolling deadlines. The funders won't know that we've moved them around on our calendar. It's just our team saying, you know what, this state grant, it's a really big priority. And the only way we're going to have the capacity as a team to do that work is if we, well, set those aside. Maybe we'll worry about them this fall. But what if yet another unexpected opportunity happens? When we look at the grant calendar, okay, what if we'd left the rolling deadlines in? We said, you know what, we could still do the state grant and get those rolling deadlines accomplished because someone else in the fundraising department is going to assist us. Or we have an intern over the summer who can assist us with some of the drafting or gathering some of the attachments. That could be the answer. We hadn't planned for that extra help. We hadn't planned for that intern to have availability to support us. So maybe we left the rolling alone, I should say. But now, when we've got yet another unexpected item, oh, okay, we've got to come back to our visual grant calendar as a team and continue to have the discussion about, do we have the capacity? Do we need to make any changes to our plan so that we're working at a sustainable pace? And the purpose of a sustainable pace is really to help us as grant professionals avoid burnout, to not do heroic things that lead to burnout. So this grant calendar, great. We agreed on it as a team. We're able to use it during the course of the year to revisit our plan and how we might adapt it when the unexpected happens. Let's zoom out and look at the full 12 months. So the exercise that you've just gone through, we'll pretend that it was a calendar year, fiscal year. So we've got January through December visualized on the screen. You placed the different deadlines under the different months and hopefully came up with a equal distribution of the work over the course of the year. By using a variety of sticky note colors, whether in a digital or a physical situation for your facilitation, you were able to see the different types of grants and relationship building efforts and reports that you would be focusing on as a team. If, when you stepped back, you saw that there was a significant amount of work in, let's say December, that the reports were almost all due in December. December tends to be a month focused on holidays. You might have some vacations coming up. And so I wonder if that's sustainable for the team. Is it even possible? Good questions. And what you might learn and focus on as a team and negotiate during that discussion phase is, well, what if, based on the other deadlines that we have on the calendar, what if we took some of those December deadlines and did as much prep work as possible in October and November so that by the time we're getting ready to finalize the reports, most of the work is done. And what we're waiting on is perhaps the most recent reconciled financials, or we're waiting on just one client data report to be run in terms of output numbers through, say, November, the end of the month. That takes that whole list of deadlines and all of a sudden puts it in a much different light for whether or not it's feasible for the team to accomplish without something heroic. So that's how you will know that this grant calendar exercise is being fruitful for your team. Not only do you have agreement about the things that will lead towards your revenue goal, but you're able to look at this visualization of the deadline of the plan and negotiate how you might approach it differently, in a better way maybe even, for your entire team. Now we have a grant calendar action guide that's a free download that you can have as part of today's session. And the way that you can access that is by either using the bit.ly address to download it, or go ahead and grab the QR code and that'll open the download as well. So once we have our grant calendar, the big picture idea agreed upon by the team, now we have to agree and decide, where does it live? So to decide on the answer to that question, where does it live? I've got a few steps laid out for you. The first is that we need to understand if your team is co-located. So do you operate out of one main office, all of you, everyone on the team? Or are you spread out across multiple locations? Or maybe you're based out of the same office, but many of you are working remotely or working hybrid or on the road seeing clients. So we just need to understand a bit about where and how the team works. That will likely influence what you use then as tools. Are you all on site? Are you hybrid and using a VPN, a virtual private network? Are you using Google Drive, Dropbox, SharePoint? What do you have for your financial software? What do you have for your fundraising software? Are you using Blackbaud or Amplifund or GrantHub for grant management? Your first step is to understand where and how the team may work together. Step 2 is to understand the tools the team is using for sharing their work and for storing their work. We don't want to adopt a tool only for purposes of the grant calendar. We want to use a tool that's natural already, that the team is used to, that's comfortable for the team, so that what we do with our grant calendar is make it accessible to all on the team in hopefully the fewest number of clicks possible. Notice how I keep talking about sharing the calendar with the grant team? That's because a grant calendar should not live on one individual's personal calendar. Nope. You might go on vacation. You might unexpectedly get sick or have to care for a family or a friend who is also unexpectedly sick. And so, well, how do we know what's happening? How do we know what's going on with our calendar? We wouldn't. It might cause a hiccup or some undue stress for the grant team. So we're going to take that visual grant calendar and put the actionable details somewhere in a tool that our team can see. It could be that it now is a Google spreadsheet. Okay, that's fine. It could be that a grant calendar is created from an admin for the organization. So not owned by a member of the grant team, not only on your personal calendar that then you hit share to, but something that is truly owned by the organization and therefore visible to the whole team. It could be that it's visible in your GrantHub, grant management software. Your goal is to figure out how quickly, when we're looking at it electronically, can someone on the team get to that grant calendar should they want to see it. Once we understand where the core members of the grant team would go to look at the calendar and the upcoming details of the plan, we want to think about the tool we've selected for our grant calendar and ask ourselves if that same tool is able to help us provide some sort of report or dashboard to our stakeholders. What I mean by that is not taking the grant calendar, let's say perhaps it's in a spreadsheet, and sharing the full spreadsheet of everything upcoming, in process, denied, pending with our board. Those spreadsheets usually make stakeholders they glaze over a little bit. Let's be honest. They want to understand the detail. They want to understand how we're progressing towards our grant revenue goals, but there is a lot of information to try and understand if presented in only something like a spreadsheet. We're not trying to create status reports either, not long narratives explaining the process or where we're at towards our goal, but rather is there a rather quick, maybe easy to update dashboard, especially if it's in one of the grant management tools. What is easiest? What could we click a button on and run for a specific period of time? We're trying to come up with what sort of dashboards would be helpful as a way for our stakeholders to understand our progress on our goal. By doing that, we've now put our grant calendar, basically our implementation plan for grant revenue. We've put the details in place. And now it's time to actually look a little bit higher in the sky. If we're thinking of our implementation plan, our grant calendar, sort of like a grant program work plan, that's the on-the-ground work that's happening. But let's think a little bit higher level. Let's think about our grant strategy. How are we thinking as an organization that grants can help us achieve our goals? Yes, absolutely, it's about the money, but let's step back and think about our organizational strategic priorities. So when we look at our strategic priorities, we could look to our strategic plan. You're right. And the question you should ask your organization's leadership is if the strategic plan document and the goals that are included, are they in the priority order that the organization wants to see those goals achieved? Hard to say if the answer is going to be yes or no. That's why we want to be sure to ask so that we understand the numerically sequential order of the priorities for the organization. That's going to help us as we think about our grant strategy. Then, if we haven't already had the conversation, we need to understand where exactly resources are needed. Where do we need the grant funds? Is it salary? Is it equipment? Is it a specific piece of equipment? Is it about general operating support? That's really what the organization cares about the most. No right or wrong answer here. This will be coming from a combination of your leadership and probably your finance team. But we need to understand the numerically sequential order of those priorities and needs. When we combine those two, that allows us to understand what are the priorities when we're looking for new funding opportunities. If we saw an open-ended funding opportunity that our organization was eligible to, how would we know which opportunity we should apply for to that new funding source? If we have these agreed upon priorities, we want to find funding for number one more than anything. We want to find funding for number two. Well, not quite as much as number one. It still is a big need, but nope, number one is still priority. Having this understanding takes the stress, the pressure off us as the grant writer, grant professional. And this is also going to be very helpful when we lay out our opportunities in our grant strategy document. So we're going to return to whatever visual tool or layout in person we were using when we looked at our grant calendar. And this time, instead of having the months as our headings, we're going to have the priorities that have been identified and agreed upon by leadership. In this case, I've shown you 12 different priorities, but maybe you have 5. Maybe you have 7. 8? Sure, no judgment. But what we want to have is a clear understanding that this is not an equal list of priorities. Priority 1, yep, it is slightly more important to find grants for that than 2, then 3, and so on. And so we're going to take the same deadlines and opportunities that we placed on our grant calendar, and we're going to place them under which priority the opportunity would be able to support. So, for example, if we put our government grants onto the priority board, would we see that, for sake of example, that there was one under priority 3, one under priority 5, one under 7, and then the rest were under priority 10 and 11? Well, that's interesting. Why are the big government grants not able to support the top priorities for the organization? Rather, they're supporting some of the lowest priorities for the organization. Well, maybe after you place the foundation grant deadlines onto the strategy layout, you realize that actually it's the foundation work that is predominantly going to support the first and second priority. Or maybe you realize that the foundation work is going to primarily support the first priority and the fourth and the sixth, but we need to try and find some funding opportunities that are going to be appropriate to fund priority number 2. By doing this work up front, when you're also laying out your grant calendar, you're able to make changes before the year is underway. This is usually done at the same time that you would be doing your operating budget planning, that you'd be looking at what the grant revenue target should be. And so if we think about our grant strategy visualization and the grant calendar visualization, we should have both operating, and we may do them simultaneously. We may start with strategy and then do the calendar. We may do calendar and then the strategy. They use the same basic information to get the work started, and we need to have both layouts done in order to make some final judgment calls and approve both the strategy for the year and then the implementation, the actionable work that we're going to do to achieve that strategy goal, to achieve the revenue. So both layouts are helpful because they show us different things. The calendar layout shows us if our plan is sustainable, if it is going to be something that our team capacity can handle, and the strategy visualization helps us to understand, is what we plan to do actually in alignment with the resource priority needs of the organization or not? Certainly better to have those conversations and identify new sources now and not at the end of the fiscal year. So in terms of thinking about the way that we facilitate the conversation with our colleagues about what our strategic priorities are, what our resource priorities are, and how we then create those numerically ordered research priorities for us, the things that help take the pressure for us off as a grant writer or a grant professional to understand, hey, if an opportunity opens and anything is fair game, the first thing is going to be what I talk to the grant maker about when I do relationship outreach. And if the first thing isn't what they're interested in, well, then I go down the list and I talk to them about the second, and so on. Well, to have a little bit of support for you in that idea, we've got our grant research guidebook as an additional download that comes with this session. And you can access that with the bit.ly link on the screen, or again, using the QR code. So now it's time to think about the grant team. I've been talking about the grant team actually in both of the first 2 sections, as we looked at the grant calendar and as we looked at the grant strategy. So let's make sure we understand, who is this grant team? How is it that they help us be such a successful organization when it comes to sustainable grant seeking? The reality is, even in each individual application, embracing the grant team idea will make your process stronger and more successful. The reason is a grant team. It's the group of colleagues that have a stake in seeing competitive grant applications be submitted so that then you can implement those funded projects to achieve your organization mission and vision. What's really important when you consider a grant team is to understand that each organization's grant team looks different. Different number of people, different skill sets that come together, different cadence for where they meet, for when they meet, for how they meet, and that's okay. A grant team, it may be a team that is formed for a very specific grant application. And then when application number 2 is tackled next month, well, that grant team has a slightly different makeup. That's okay. There can be application-specific grant teams. There also is very likely going to be a grant team that is the large strategic grant team that focuses on the overall strategy and planning, which we just laid out when we looked at the calendar and the strategy. The overlap between an application-specific team and the strategic team is usually, at a minimum, the grant writer or the grant professional. That's the tie that binds across the different grant teams that are pulled together during the course of a year. So how do you know who should be involved? Well, maybe you have some strong ideas, but how do we help our colleagues to understand who should be involved? When we think about that strategic grant team, the one that's helping to confirm what the strategy is for the year, what the deadlines are, who the funders are that we will apply to, that's usually a form of leadership. Maybe it's some senior leaders and some board. Maybe it's all senior leaders, no board. It just gets presented to the board. We've seen lots of successful iterations of what that looks like. Lots of room for flexibility, but the grant professional needs to be a part of that process, even if not the one facilitating. But the individual grant application, grant teams, well, it depends on what the application is for how deep and wide within the organization you may need to go to find some members for your grant team. If we're thinking about a small foundation application, you likely need someone from the programmatic staff who's going to provide some input and approval, and you probably need someone from the finance team that'll help with the budget. That may be the perfect grant team for that application, working with you, the grant writer, the grant professional. But when we expand to something larger, like a big state application or a large federal application, it may take some of the different roles listed on your screen in order to get the work successfully done. So you might want to have this as a reference for when you encounter large applications. Who can help us with fill in the blank with the key activity item on the left-hand side of the table? Okay, let me see. Who in my organization would be the right person to ask? And then we've got the responsible individuals in the column on the right. As I mentioned, the grant team, while one general idea for your organization, may have different groupings that come together over the course of the year. So if you have a grant team that is multi-purposed, different combinations of staff people at different points in the year, the grant team that is the strategy focused team should help to make sure that you as the grant writer, grant professional, have a clear understanding of how the strategic plan translates into that strategy. The senior leadership or the board or the combination of people that have come together to talk about the strategy should be able to talk to you about those strategic priorities in numbered order. What's the most important priority? What's the second most important priority? And also to then talk about those resource needs. That's the expectation for that high level. Sometimes this gets facilitated by an executive director with all of the department heads, or it gets facilitated by a board chair with the different heads of the departments. And the grant professional, you might be there, but not necessarily be the key facilitator. You might be part of the conversation or able to ask questions of the team when they're working. But the grant team that comes together for a specific application, do they need to understand the whole calendar? Do they need to understand the whole strategy that has been approved? I would say it depends. So before we talk about how the grant team is going to help you in implementing the plan, in doing individual application support work, it is really helpful for grant team members, even if they are air quotes only part of one application a year, to understand what they're part of. What is the bigger picture for the strategy? They can have just a very small understanding of that, just to see where is this in context of the organizational priorities. But when the calendar is approved, if you know that you're going to need someone's specialty on 1 grant or 3 grants or 5 grants, best to share the calendar with them up front so they understand where is their support going to be needed and they can plan accordingly with their own workload over the course of the year. Once they understand that, okay, where's that grant team going to be engaged? You're right. It's most likely that they're going to help provide information related to writing those competitive applications. So how can we make that less stressful, and more sustainable. You're right. We did. We told our colleagues that over the course of the 12 months, well, let's see, colleague A, I'm going to need your help on this big application that's due in April, and this one here in September, and then, oh, there's 2 in November that I know I'm going to need your help with. I told them that. So why is it so hard to get the information I'm asking for? Or why is it that it feels like I'm really having to really chase people down to get what I need? I'm not saying that's the case in all organizations or in all grant teams, but it certainly does happen from well-intentioned colleagues because there's so much going on in order to achieve your mission in your organization. So when we think about how we as a grant writer or a grant professional, even with the advance notice we provide by sharing the calendar, if we think about what we're going to ask of our colleagues, I encourage you to frame out your information and make your asks as distinct as possible to your colleagues. So I've got an example on the screen here for how you can put together a framed out narrative structure versus saying, hey, dear colleague B, could you please come and assist me with this narrative response over here on our outcomes, on our objectives? That could feel pretty stressful for the colleague. So what if instead we gave some framing like this example? Dear colleague, could you please help answer the items that are in red text or that are highlighted in yellow or that have your name? I tagged you in a paragraph where I've got some blanks that I'm looking for your help with. So if we thought of that in terms of our narrative framing, the colleague comes into the document and they see in the upcoming school year, the XX project. Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. I forgot to tell you the project name. Okay. So it's the STAR project. Will serve. Oh, okay. So it's going to be 125 students, but it's not 7th and 8th. It's 6th, 7th, and 8th because we're working with a middle school, not a junior high. Oh, and also, actually, you know what? So when we talk about those 125, it's actually split into 2 separate things. But you see where I'm going with this idea? By framing it out, we've made it easier to gather information from our colleagues. We've asked very specific targeted things, less stressful than looking at a blank cursor for a question. And it also prompted some other information for them to share in some terms of some of the details. So this framing is where you as the grant writer, the grant professional, take as much as you know to create some sentence structure where the colleague can give you information. This idea is actually by a colleague of mine, Cheryl Kester, is referred to as MSU, making stuff up. We're not making anything up, but what we're doing is giving the structure for where we will learn information almost Mad Lib style. If you've ever played that game where you will be asked to give a noun, a verb, how about another noun, how about an adverb, and then at the end you laugh because those words, when placed without knowing the context in advance in the story, become something hilarious. Well, that's the same idea here for how we're providing a structured place for our colleagues to give feedback. It's not going to be funny. It's going to give us the real information. They can see the context of what we need, but it is easier, just like that Mad Libs game, it's easy to just give a noun, just give a verb, versus asking for someone to write a silly story. Our grant team, they are also the experts that are likely going to be the ones to help us provide the smart details for our objectives. They're going to know the specifics. We just learned that in the last example. They're going to know the time-bound elements. In the upcoming school year, in the upcoming 3 months, they'll be able to tell us the detail that will ensure that our objectives are smart and we don't leave our reviewers with unanswered questions. Our grant team members absolutely may have a passion for logic models, or even if they don't have the passion for logic models, they know the information that needs to go into this visualization of our work. Our grant team members, absolutely. Yep, you're right. They know our key activities. They know our timelines. They know who will be doing that work and how we will know when it's done and if it's been successful. Our grant team It's not just about the program, it's absolutely about the budget. And so we will want someone from finance who's there to help us understand the total cost of a project, where we should ask for the funding, what other sources do we have, to help us align the timelines for one grant versus another, to understand what is an uncovered cost at this moment where we should make sure to find grant revenue. So having our finance colleagues at the table from the beginning for the collaboration is incredibly helpful. Now you might say, well, what about some of the other colleagues that would be happy to help, but I'm not really sure what to have them do. I don't need lots of writers. So if you have well-intentioned colleagues who are willing to help, they do want to be part of the grant team because they have a stake in grants being successful. They need that revenue to operate the programs for the group. Okay, they might be a perfect mock reviewer. So mock review is the process a grant team can run before submitting an application, especially for large grants like state or federal opportunities. And there's a few things that are important to know about mock review. This is above and beyond copy editing. Copy editing is incredibly important. We need to ensure we're consistent with our grammar. Are we using APA style? Let's make sure we follow it in our entire document. Are we following MLA? Okay, but let's make sure we're following it in the entire document. Copy editing is going to give us some suggestions related to word choice. Okay, that's great, but it's based on the opinion of the person providing the edits. Mock review, on the other hand, is taking an application that is so finalized, so complete that you could submit it, but it's pausing the process to let at least one person, although ideally 3, look at the opportunity, read the application, and score or judge it, depending on the funder, in the way that you believe the application will be scored or judged. What that's allowing is the opportunity for the applicant, you, the organization, to make final adjustments so that you are most directly answering the question, so that you stand the potential to truly score the highest if it is a scored opportunity. So mock review is after the copy editing is done, after the final polishing, before you would actually put it in the portal and submit, before you would PDF it and click send on the email, having at least one colleague, ideally 3, provide a review against the funder's guidelines or scoring rubric to find any final areas for improvement before you submit. This is an incredibly powerful way to harness the well-intentioned members of the grant team who don't always have an active role in a specific application. Their fresh eyes are actually perfect for mock review. Now let's think about this grant team. When we talked about the strategic grant team, the one that's helping to set the strategy and agree on what the calendar will be to achieve that strategy, that may not be the same team that's doing individual applications. Fair. So we just need to understand that within our organization and to know the cadence with which the different groups might meet. The leadership group that focuses on strategy, how often do they want to have an update? The team that focuses on the calendar and moving the pieces along, which of those team members check in and meet on a regular basis or not? And what would be the cadence when we're in a specific application? Those vary significantly. If we have a federal grant that's due in 30 days, okay, we're going to be meeting maybe every other day. Versus if we are pre-planning for an application that opens next quarter, maybe we meet every other week to talk about it. No right or wrong answer, but we want to have a plan so that we can confirm that we know who is definitely engaged in this process. Who can we count on to support us as we move towards this application deadline or as we move towards implementing the overall strategy? And ask ourselves then, who or what skill is missing? Do we need to find someone who can talk to us about our quality process? Do we need to find someone who can come in and help us with the logic model for our programs? What might be missing? That way we can start to invite them. or maybe ask our leadership to invite them to the table. Dear colleague, I'm going to need to ask for you to be a part of this grant process. We're going after this new federal grant for the first time ever next quarter, and I'm going to want to have your perspective there. Could you please connect with the grant writer about that meeting schedule and where and how you'll be engaged? Right? That may be best sometimes coming from an executive director or CEO. But the point of these steps is to identify who do you have, who do you need, and let's get those that you need at the table before we're too close to a deadline. So when we think about how we're going to successfully facilitate this team, now this is about you as the grant writer, the grant professional saying, team, we have an agreed upon strategy, we have an agreed upon calendar. All right, let's get to work. So you're going to acknowledge your role for facilitation and if it might be anything different than what happened at that annual strategy level. And then we're going to talk about how do we communicate? Where do we communicate? What tools are we agreeing to use? Is it GrantHub? Is it Dropbox? Is it SharePoint and GChat? Where are we talking and what are going to be our team norms? These are likely rooted in your organization's communication norms and your organization tools that are utilized, but there might be some nuances specific to the grant team. By setting these expectations up front, except for you, the grant writer, the grant professional, who might not even be full-time in your role, those who are supporting the efforts and are definitely not full-time thinking about grants, it gives them boundaries for what does the grant support work look like? What does it mean to be on the grant team? So how often are we meeting and where are we communicating and where can I find the materials again? If we set the boundaries and stick to the boundaries, we're setting the stage for a successful grant team. When we think about our grant team and those expectations, those norms, I love to facilitate those using something called a team working agreement. I've also heard it referred to in some nonprofits as a team charter. The idea in a working agreement is that we acknowledge what is the purpose that this group is brought together for, what are the strengths and skills that we might have. Maybe that's where you learn that one of your colleagues loves logic models. Hey, that's good information to know. And then we also can, in the team working agreement, talk about our goal related to our purpose, the values that we bring to this team, and most importantly, in terms of an actionable way that we keep this document, this agreement front and center, the rules, those boundaries. Slack only, GChat first, then email, Uber conference for calls versus Zoom. What are the ways that we are going to work together? That's really what we want to make sure is documented in our working agreement and that the whole team says, yep, we agree. These are the rules we will operate by. So a template that I love comes from Agile in Nonprofits, which is a project of D.H. Leonard Consulting, and you can download that as a part of your course support today as well. You've got the bit.ly option as well, again, as the QR code. So when we're facilitating this team, we are going to, in all elements of our work, continue to ask ourselves, how can I make the work visible? You started that with the grant calendar. You started that with the grant strategy. How can you continue that? How can you ensure that what you made visible to the team from the beginning is your anchor, is what the team returns to when something unexpected happens, that you are responding to change over only following the plan. Grants can be pretty predictable until they're not. So how are you going to make the work visible for the team so that you can adapt to that change together? Making work visible, though, also returns us back to that earlier comment about how few clicks can you make it so that your grant team can get to the grant calendar. You should challenge yourself in the same way when you think about how to get the team to the work itself. How fast, how easy is it for the team to get to the different documents? Don't make them dig through a drive or through a SharePoint. One idea is to do something called a project digest. So if you have all of your electronic records in one main space, instead of making sure your colleagues have memorized where in which folder is which type of information, and that they understand all the nuances of which attachment, and is it the PDF that's fillable from the grantmaker or the Google Doc that you're working right now. Let's take out all that confusion that could derail the process. And if we just had a project digest with all the key documents, with all the right links, and now the only thing the colleagues have to worry about is that one document, and they know that they will quickly navigate to the key items that they need. Wow, you're right, each document will be a separate click, but by giving them that one digest, we have made it incredibly fast for them to click into where they need to be to give you the info or the support. Now, we would be remiss if all we did was talk about the work, but not celebrating. Oh, hold on. We're going to celebrate a whole lot more than only awards. Following this idea of a grant strategy, of a visual grant calendar, of an engaged grant team, there is a lot of amazing work that's happening that needs to be celebrated. So the iceberg illusion, I've got the image here from Sylvia Duckworth on the screen. The success that people see and are used to celebrating for a grant team, the grant awards, you're right, the money. But the hard work of the grant team in following these principles and ideas that I've laid out today is worth celebrating. That is actually what's going to create the success in the form of grant awards and grant revenue. So think about how you can celebrate things like great collaborative meetings, a wonderful mock review, uh, a, a cleaner way of maintaining application documents during a federal application using a project digest so that it was less stressful for all involved. That is all worth celebrating. How you celebrate, well, that's up to you. Find things that are, well, ideally inexpensive, but fun to the team. Make it breakfast bagels and coffee. Make it that everyone has an extra 5 minutes after lunch to stretch and get settled in, go get hot tea or coffee. Well, maybe make it 15 minutes. Sure, let everybody get settled back in. Bring Girl Scout cookies in during Girl Scout cookie sales. Whatever it is that works. In fact, our team has a yellow dingy bell, little smiley face dingy bell that all of the team members have. They cost about $5 online. Everyone has one and they ding them on Zoom or on the phone when great things happen. So it's a one-time quick expense, but everyone has it and it became part of the culture for the team for celebrating those tiny moments. Now, of course, we need to ring all the bells and do all the things still when you get the award, but have some fun with the little victories along the way, as it's not just you anymore, it's your grant team, following your grant calendar towards achieving your grant strategy. Now, please be sure to reach out and ask questions wherever you want to ask a question. I'm happy to answer, whether it's on social media, maybe it's like LinkedIn messages or direct message on Facebook, that's fine. Or of course, please feel free to email me with any questions you have after you've finished today's session. Maybe you download those different resources I shared and you've got some more questions. By all means, happy to hear from you, happy to help. My email is diane@dhleonardconsulting.com. I want to thank everyone for taking time to join me for Grant Calendar versus Grant Strategy. I hope that as a result of this session, you have a stronger understanding of both and how important they can be to running a successful grant team. I wish you the best of success for your grant seeking efforts and look forward to answering any questions you may have for me afterwards.